What's going on, everybody? This is Jordan with Conquer Trading and Investing. We're going to take a look right now in this video at Bitcoin on the log scale. We're going to be taking a look at potential profits for this bull market cycle, where price might be peaking and when. The first thing I'm going to look at over here, though, is this observation over here that, look, during the 2017, by the way, this chart was shared to me by Patrick. Patrick, thanks for sending this chart my way. It's very important to look at right now. Your timing is absolutely perfect. I wish that we had the halvings included over here, the halving events. What's highlighted here in purple is actually the bull market phase. It's actually 2017. You can see now we have 2021 highlighted in purple. It's absolutely perfect to look at. What Patrick is looking at and wondering is, Jordan, over here in the 2017 bull market phase, in the heart of it, we came down and tested this trend line over here. Now during this next phase, during this bear market over here, we actually tested this trend line, which is lower. You could see back all the way in 2012, this trend line was first touched over here. You had a touch over here, and then again, and it wasn't until the liquidity crisis in 2020 that we went ahead and not only touched this trend line, but broke below it. This was an anomaly. I don't think this would have occurred outside of the dollar liquidity crisis. It did occur. The model did break, and it broke to the downside. Here's an occasion of the model perhaps breaking to the upside, right? Will we see that again in 2021? Something to watch out for. But the question is what do we make of the fact that Bitcoin went ahead and traded lower than this trend line over here in 2017? You see we had a touch of it. And now over here in 2021, we've traded down lower than that. Now, initially, when I did all of my work for my price target for Bitcoin in the bull market phase, I worked the math out to be $160,000. Really interesting, and to note that over here, September 21, and by the way, this is where I'm looking for a potential top at the end of September in 2021. It is possible that does not occur to sometime in November, October, or even to December. We'll be watching price action at that time, but I think that we're going to see a shorter cycle, and I think that it's going to peak somewhere around September and the September of 2020. Do note that over here that my 160,000 price target, which was not calculated using any of these trend lines, does come into play with one of these trend lines. I find that very interesting, but I did use diminishing returns to get that target. I went out in the middle of December. I notified all of you, listen, I was wrong. The market is showing me something different. We're not seeing any signs of diminishing returns. I have to adapt to the market. I have no desire to be right. I only want to be correct and on the right side of the trade. And when I did my 160,000, you all are familiar with my 140,000 price target, like mission accomplished. That was based off the math of 160 using diminishing returns. I don't believe that's the case anymore. And why it's so important, Patrick shared this chart with us at this time, because it does give us potential targets to look at using these trend lines above. Now, when you first look at this chart, the first thing I noticed when Patrick is asking me, what do you make of that? The first thing my eyes are drawn to, right? We had this higher peak over here, and then we had a lower peak. We had this low over here during the bear market phase, and then a lower low, right? Now, everyone is considering whether or not we're having lengthening cycles, and in those lengthening cycles, we're having less of drawdowns. Well, this data would not confirm that. And if I were to go ahead and look at the fact that, all right, well, listen, we're making over here lower highs, then maybe at this time we'll be targeting somewhere over here, perhaps into whether or not this line over at 243,000 or perhaps over into 437,000. That over here, you could see this last peak above this trend line over here, the support that was generated over here, that became resistance. That's where we tested into. If you go down one module, one trend line over here, we're looking at that support now should be resistance. That could be somewhere around 437. Or if you were to use the trend line below it and look in that area, that would have us at 243,000. So the first thing my eyes were drawn to was this higher high over here and then a lower high. Patrick's asking, since we made a low over here during the bear market and then a lower low, are we looking at something perhaps now making another lower low? Where would that be? Would that be somewhere around 160,000? Would that be a little higher, 243,000? Or are we looking at something like, okay, during the first cycle, right, which had this enormous peak over here, we traded off the lower band and then traded up above the higher band. Volatility increased during this cycle. During this cycle over here, we had a decrease over here to this trend line over here, one of the lower trend lines of the band, but not the lowest, right? And then we had over here a test only into the upper trend line over here. We didn't go ahead and we didn't put in a high outside of here as we did in the last. Does that mean that this cycle over here was more muted, not only to the downside, but to the upside? And now that we saw the volatility increase again, and we went back to this lower line over here, we may be perhaps now targeting even higher towards that upper band over here. I don't know. I have no idea. What I do know very clearly is that I was wrong about looking to model this cycle off of diminishing returns with my $160,000 price target. Now, it still stands. If Bitcoin reaches $140,000, all my goals have been achieved. And when I put something out there to the community, when I put something out on YouTube, I want to make sure that I'm as correct as possible, right? I want a history of being correct. So when I used my price target for the upcoming bull market cycle, I wanted to make sure that I put something out there that had a high probability of being achieved. I went ahead in mid-December and corrected myself and said, listen, it's now been quite a while since the halving. It's clear to me that the market is not seeing any type of diminishing returns whatsoever, that this market is outperforming the last cycle. There's no indication that that should cease. And that I also believe that this cycle is going to be shorter than last cycle. And I've showed you why and illustrated that for you right now. What I think is most important, what I think is the most important piece of this video, and what is the most important piece for us going forward, I love this chart over here. I love the trend lines that are placed in here. I think they're all enormously useful and relevant. And I think as we get closer here, as we get closer to the fall, right? And as we get into the end of September and we're watching price and we're seeing where we are at that moment, right? If come September, we're trading below $160,000, all right, well, maybe then $160,000 is going to be where we peak out at, right? But if we're trading already above $160,000, at that point, where are we and what will we be targeting, right? We'll have these targets, and I think that these trend lines will provide great possible targets to watch how price reacts around them. And over here, just so you are familiar with what they are right now, it's 243,000 over here. Do I think that's possible? Right? I've talked about repeatedly. I talked about this morning. I would not be surprised in the least to see Bitcoin trade at $280,000. What about higher than that? The next one up here, the next trend line over here. I love this trend line over here. Here it was strong resistance that became support, right? Again, that was established for support briefly. That area, that's targeting $437,000. Is that something that I believe that we could see during this bull market phase? I have to be honest, it's a little higher than my expectations. But that being said, there is serious potential that the model breaks to the upside this cycle. Why I don't think that we're going to enter a super cycle. We have to be aware of the possibility of that, and we have to remain fluid to what the market is showing us. Above that, you're looking at $663,000. Something to be aware of. Something to be aware of, right? So this log scale chart over here, these trend lines is something that I want to keep following going forward. As a matter of fact, at this point, right, we did all the hard work. We got positioned. We laid out the case well ahead of time. We've got positioned. Right now, I think that raising our time preference, right? Looking here at the, I've been looking at the 3-day chart often on Bitcoin. Now moving over to the weekly, watching these trend lines. You know what? The most difficult part is doing nothing. The most difficult part of trading through an investment like this is not making the wrong decisions by over trading, overreacting, over analyzing. I really like this vantage point. I really like this view. I think it'll be really helpful for us. Could we use these levels over here, right? As Bitcoin comes into this area over here around 53,000, is that something we should be paying attention to? Absolutely. Absolutely. Could we use conquering the markets once we break above that resistance, retest it and resume off of it for another entry? Absolutely. We'll do it together. Thanks for sharing this chart with me. Entirely useful. I wouldn't read into anything as far as in this bear market over here, trading off this lower line over here, established back in 2012, trading lower than the last bear market, as I wouldn't read in anything into this last bull market top being lower than the previous one. I don't think that we're seeing diminishing returns. I think the market is speaking loud and clear. I only want to pay attention to the market and be on that right side of the trade. All right, everyone. If you have any comments, any observations that you would like to share, let's continue this down in the comments. I'll talk to you soon.